As promised, a very special, very sad, very shocking edition of the Week in Review this week as we focus exclusively on our extensive coverage of the saga of R.J. May, the South Carolina state rep who has been embroiled in a child sex abuse scandal, the details of which are going to chill you to your core. We're going to address this scandal in two parts. First, I'm going to speak with our Andy Fancher, our lead investigative reporter who has been on top of every major development in this story to bring you up to speed on the very specific charges May is facing, the process, and what Andy saw in court this week when May was arraigned on those charges. Then, I'm going to sit down with our Dylan Nolan to break down the political fallout which continues to reverberate across the South Carolina political landscape. But first, Andy Fancher, as we start this segment, just give us your overview here of the R.J. May saga.
Sure, and compelling. It's one of the more grotesque stories I've ever covered, including extremely detailed court filings, which we will get into in a moment. But taking a 10,000 step back look and approach at this case, there, as we have now learned, appear to be two R.J. Mays. There's the statewide recognized luminary known for championing conservative values, and then there is the monster federal agents accuse him of being as early as March of 2024. And for better or worse, we are in this segment talking about the latter of the men.
The monster.
The monster. We're talking about a politician charged with using an instant messaging app to solicit recordings of children his own kid's age being abused. It is worth noting that RJ has entered a plea of not guilty and that no files containing child sex abuse material or CSAM have been found in any of his devices seized by federal authorities, and we're looking at approximately 30 on that front. Mm-hmm. But that specific detail, along with the true depth of the federal case against RJ, didn't really come out until his attorney, Dwayne Phillips, chose to move forward with a detention hearing on Thursday.
And this is the question. Basically, you've already been arraigned. You've waived your right to have the indictment read. The detention phase is, are you going to be locked up while the charges are adjudicated or not? And they decided, obviously, that yes, R.J. May will remain in custody while we await the disposition of the charges. But Andy, you mentioned just a moment ago talking about those devices. Walk us through what the feds did have on R.J. May.
Sure, and as we have exclusively reported, we had some claims reaffirmed in federal court on Thursday, but to the exacts of this investigation, at least as they revealed in court, I suppose it all started in May of 2024 when Kik submitted a cyber tip.
And what is Kik, real quick, before we get
Sure. So Kik, and I suppose that's definitely worth emphasizing. So it is a freeware instant messaging app that was marketed, quite honestly, for kids of Dylan's and I's generation, which, looking back on it now, hindsight 2020, I mean, it is exactly what CBS News described it in 2016, a predator's paradise, an app once marketed, tailored for children to connect with children, now used as a hub for all manner of grotesque content being transferred on a daily basis.
This is the platform that the feds are alleging RJ may use to share these just horrific files.
Absolutely. So Kik, and it's quite ironic considering that I was just in federal court covering a carbon copy case involving a Rock Hill officer who was, it's no longer purported, he was found guilty on all counts of receiving and sending CSAM material on Kik. And just as Kik did in the Rock Hill case as this, they did submit a cyber tip to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, indicating someone, in RJ's case, bearing the username Joe Biden 69, Biden spelt with 4 N's, had distributed approximately 50 files containing child porn from an IP address associated with a West Columbia home.
And at this point, no one has any idea who this is. This is just the app flagging these things, sending it to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and then they refer it to law enforcement?
Correct. What NCMEC will do is they'll refer it to more localized agents, and ironically, that cyber tip, NCMEC cyber tip, was forwarded to the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson, who RJ helped get elected.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, that cyber tip was forwarded to the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, Office of Sheriff Jay Kuhn, who RJ helped get elected. And within the same month of every Freedom Caucus member securing re-election in what you referred to in a 2024 report as a pivotal Republican primary, a search warrant was executed for the contents of Joe Biden 69's Kik account. Mm-hmm. And reading exactly from the U.S. Attorney's motion to keep RJ May detained, mm-hmm. The contents from the account contain 265 videos displaying CSAM from March 30th, 2024 until April 4th, 2024. That's a 5-day period. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden, 69, sent or received approximately 1,147 messages with other Kik users. The messages discussed trading CSAM with others. And I'll spare everyone the full details of what that content.
Well, actually, Andy, aren't they so bad we can't even talk about them? Really?
I mean, we would be flagged. Right. We would be taken down on YouTube.
That's how graphic and horrific and disturbing these accounts are.
I mean, understand, seriously. I mean, it is probably the darkest, most sickest court filing I've ever read, not just for FITSNews, but ever. I mean, we're talking nursing infants, children in pain,
toddlers.
Details all the way down to Hello Kitty bed sheets, man. So according to the Department of Homeland Security, who eventually commandeered this investigation, rising it to a level of a federal and at one point an international investigation, and citing specifically Special Agent Britton Lorenzen, the only witness to take the stand during Thursday's detention hearing, that pedophilic content that we just mentioned that we literally cannot talk about was being viewed, accessed, and shared simultaneous with RJ's daily life, including but not limited to texting his wife, reaching out to colleagues, calling legislators. In fact, electronic analysis that was read off in court, read aloud to journalists, revealed time-stamped moments where RJ was emailing people about political yard signs, performing searches of candidates on Facebook, followed minutes later by messaging, allegedly, someone on Kik for content related to father, mother, daughter incest porn.
Now, I got to ask you this, Andy, because you mentioned earlier when they pull all these devices, there's apparently nothing on the devices, but you pointed out how there's this trail of forensic breadcrumbs that lead them back to RJ. And walk us through how the feds documented in court that, hey, this is RJ May that was responsible for these file transfers, allegedly. Walk us through how they made that case.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting I'm referring to a sea of notes here because cameras are not allowed in federal court. No recording devices are allowed in federal court. So I'm relying on my own scribbled notes being digitized here across multiple platforms. But to answer your question about how these allegations, how this Kik account, which is already forensically tied to RJ's IP address, is linked to him specifically. So a forensic analysis of RJ's personal Samsung revealed the Kik application as well as 2 instant messaging apps and a file sharing app were all deleted within seconds of one another on April 4th, 2024. And the same forensic analysis of that phone, the phone obtained, of course, in a search warrant that we reported on last year, they discovered the following words saved within a device that RJ told federal authorities was his device. Specifically, Joe Biden, 69, spelt with 4 N's, as well as Joho 12368. That's important because that, according to authorities, is the Gmail address used to register the Kik account, according to Kik data. Also within RJ's phone were naked pictures of at least one of his minor children, although it is imperative to note feds did not consider this to be CSAM material, and NCMEC later confirmed that that content does not appear to have been used to engage with offenders online. However, in the product of a forensic interview with RJ's oldest son, who is a minor, Special Agent Lorenzen described that interview as, quote, one of the more unusual ones she'd ever witnessed, noting that the child became visibly agitated when asked about photos, appearing to be specifically from a birthday party. The child told authorities he didn't want to talk about it, later told authorities he couldn't talk about it, and when authorities circled back during that interview for a third time, they noted that he started hitting himself and finally grabbed a piece of Scotch tape and covered his own mouth with it, to which the forensic interview was suspended out of fear of the child's personal well-being.
This was all testified to in court.
This was all according to Special Agent Lorenzen, who again was the only witness called to the stand during Thursday's hearing.
Let me ask you this question, Andy. Who is Eric Rentling? Heard that name. We saw that name on the indictment, for the 10-count indictment of R.J. May. Who is Eric Rentling?
That is a question that federal authorities evidently had too. Who is Eric Rentling? So that same forensic analysis of RJ's phone, where they detailed some of the Kik issues that I just laid out, they uncovered yet another alias, which is Eric Rentling, an identity federal agents say was used to register accounts on multiple apps, including Mega, which is a file-sharing app, and PayPal, which we all know what PayPal is. This alias was used to arrange trips specifically to Bogota and Medellin, Colombia, between April and July of 2024. Once again, reading from the U.S. Attorney's motion to keep RJ detained. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, located a series of conversations with female sex workers in the area around Medellin, Colombia, a place well known for sex work. There were no less than 40 conversations with females using Facebook Instant Messenger via the alias Facebook account Eric Rentling. These messages were in Spanish and consisted largely of arranging meetup dates, time, price negotiations, and rules regarding the videoing of sexual encounters.
This is where we get into the reports we've heard of these videos of a GoPro camera on the head of an individual alleged to be R.J. May filming these sexual encounters overseas. Now, any of these individuals underage, or what do we know about these alleged encounters in South America?
Sure. Well, now, we didn't talk about camera model types. We didn't get that specific in federal court, but a search of RJ's Lenovo laptop did uncover 9 separate videos of him purportedly engaging in sexual acts with at least 3 different women, all of whom appear to be in South America and speaking Spanish. Special Agent Lorenzen further testified on Thursday that the women in these recordings, quote, looked fairly young, and she said she believed that they were underaged due to undeveloped anatomy, as she put it. It was further noted that 2 agents with HSI were deployed to Medellin in an effort to locate what the courts are referring to as potential victims, but those efforts were unsuccessful.
Andy, you have been at the center of this story, and I can tell just listening to you because the tone that we hear from you so often on this show, I can tell this has impacted you covering this. Just the tone, it's somber. But I wanted to ask you because you were there when this original search was conducted. You were there this week when R.J. May was taken into custody. You're the only reporter there. You were there in the courtroom watching these graphic details be presented, watching R.J. May respond to them, watching his wife sitting behind him. Tell us about some of your takeaways from what you've seen in covering this case.
Sure. I recall it was August 5th, 2024 is where the beginning of the end started. By the time we had arrived, authorities had left, but I do vividly recall the overhead lights on in seemingly every room of his beautiful house in West Columbia. And then you fast forward 10 months later to this armada of law enforcement directly in front of that same house on the Wednesday that just passed. Watching a man who I have encountered many times at the State House in nothing short of a suit and tie, wearing a white t-shirt, gray gym shorts, tube socks, and boots of some variation, in handcuffs, surrounded by federal and state agents, including Agent Lorenzen, who was standing behind him for the majority of what at least I saw on Wednesday. He was,
and in court, he was also shackled, cuffed, and shackled.
He was shackled at the waist,
Yeah.
shackled at the ankles, wearing the exact same outfit that we watched them carry him off in a blacked out Nissan Titan. And it's no secret that a majority of journalists who were in the peanut gallery at federal court, they knew RJ as the pinned up suit and tie, freedom fighting hardliner. And here he is accused of the worst possible crimes imaginable, wearing basketball shorts and a white t-shirt. Directly behind me is where his wife and potentially extended family was sitting. Perhaps apropos of nothing, because I was not there the whole time, I did not once see RJ, who was sitting about as far from me as you are right now. I did not see him once look back at his wife.
When there are reports that upon leaving the court, he blew her a kiss, looked at her or something, but obviously we don't know what she knew. In fact, one of the interesting things about the federal motion to detain R.J. May, which I'm going to talk about in the next segment with Dylan, was essentially they were arguing that if this man can keep this behavior hidden from his wife, it's obviously he can keep it hidden from anybody. Let me ask you this though, Andy. As we dug into this story, as we started, I mean, we've been on this from the beginning, and everything that we reported from the beginning has panned out. But it's important to note that these details, until this week, none of it had ever been laid out on the record. It was all us relying on our network of sources, which again we do in an effort to try to get the truth out there as quickly as possible. But talk a little bit about that, how all of this really was up in the air until this week when that warrant dropped and when that motion to deny bond was filed.
I would say this past week, as uncomfortable as it has been for everyone, is undoubtedly a testament to our sources, as well as a reminder to readers that we not only take the anonymity of our sources very seriously, but that if you want to hold truth to power, we'll keep your name, your title protected, and ensure that the information you relay to us is used appropriately.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, your coverage of this just outstanding. And for those of you following this, as Andy reported, R.J. May pleaded not guilty to these charges. He was ordered to remain detained while the charges against him are pending. He was suspended from his position as a representative in the South Carolina House. That is a statutory suspension. It was announced by the Speaker of the House, Merle Smith, but the moment those indictments were unsealed with these charges of clear crimes of moral turpitude, beyond that, honestly. But once that threshold had been met, he is automatically suspended from office by statute, and a movement is underway to have him expelled from the South Carolina House of Representatives. I'm going to dive into that here in just a minute with Dylan Nolan, our producer on this show and one of our top political minds here on the Week in Review. But before we let you leave, Andy, I just wanted to say once again, you've done amazing work on this story. It's been incredibly difficult, incredibly graphic. You've had a lot of folks along the way challenging some of the stuff we put out there, but you've done amazing work from the beginning. Thank you for diving into this stuff, man, and keep us up to speed on where this case is going.
Thank you, Will.
So as we shift gears on this story now to the political fallout, I am joined by Dylan Nolan. We've been following this story, Dylan, on the political side as well for a while, because from the very beginning, when we first reported on that initial raid by Homeland Security agents, the political fallout was immediate. And we've been tracking it as everyone in the South Carolina political sphere has had a response to what happened this week on the RJ May saga. But I wanted to start with the response of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, the organization of which May was their vice chairman. Many have called him the ideological soul of the Freedom Caucus. He ran many of the races for Freedom Caucus candidates, in addition to other political work that he did. But Dylan, we have talked, and before I read this statement that the caucus issued, we have talked, and I have written in the past about how the Freedom Caucus's initial response to the RJ May allegations was very disjointed. There didn't seem to be a lot of strategic planning to it. There were statements that some said were contradictory, that others said were confused.
I attended a press conference where they were unrolling their legislative agenda, and after the press conference, their chairman, Jordan Pace, took questions from the press, and Maayan Shedeker was pressing him on RJ May's involvement with the caucus, and he was very much so trying to get around the question and skirt the question, which I thought was, as you say, not a very strategic response, given the fact that they had weeks to prepare for how they would like to deal with this, and they didn't initially deal with it head on.
Speaking of previous leadership, one person I noticed is not here is RJ May. Have any of you had any contact with him recently? Any update you can share about RJ?
I haven't got anything to share with you. Obviously, there's several members that aren't here for various reasons. But
is he included in that total number that you've given in terms of how many members you're going to have in the next legislative session?
What do you mean?
The 20 to 21 that you gave, is he included as a member?
That depends on, a lot of things.
And did he have any type of involvement in crafting some of these legislative priorities for the next session?
I have not talked with them in quite some time, if that answers.
Did the caucus talk to Representative May?
Beyond just personal, hey, how are you doing? I don't think so, no.
Do you expect him here on December 3rd?
We'll see. Probably know as much as I do.
Do you consider him a current member of the Freedom Caucus?
He's a current member of the House.
He's a current member of the House.
But is he a member of the caucus?
He's a current member of the House, and I'm curious why you're asking.
I didn't know if he's still in the caucus.
Sure.
That's why I'm asking.
Why would you say he's not? Just because he's not here?
Yeah.
There's a lot of members that aren't here.
But as of now, within the 20 to 21 number, the expectation of who's going to be in the caucus
Sure.
for the legislative session, RJ is included in that number.
If he's a member of the House, and there's no reason to exclude him.
So yes.
He's an upstanding.
If he's a member of the House and he's an upstanding member of the, I'm curious why you're asking that.
Well, it's publicly available that he's been under investigation. That's been well reported already, right? We don't have it on record what, but
Right.
we already know the documentation that the U.S. Attorney's Office has
Sure.
released. So that's why we're asking if he is still a member of the caucus.
Okay. Well, we're here to talk about legislative priorities, first and foremost. So I'm happy to answer the questions about that. Whether who's here and why, I don't know the answer to all those things.
Let's talk a little bit about the box they're in, because as we reported at the time, there was a raid. We shortly thereafter confirmed what was taken. We shortly thereafter confirmed what the focus of the raid was. But at this point, there were no indictments. There were no charges.
So do you take the word of a news outlet and throw one of your members overboard is the problem that they were faced with.
Was that an impossible situation, or was it a situation they could have managed more strategically?
They were definitely not as smooth with communicating the issue as they could have been. But as you say, they're in a very difficult position because not only did they have to rely on just the word of one news outlet because nobody else really was reporting the things that were reporting at that time, but also this was in a national political environment where there was a pretty unprecedented level of political prosecutions going on. So I can understand why they didn't want to throw somebody overboard before any documents had been presented in a court of law.
Well, and also let's not forget the whispers that we were hearing out of R.J. May's camp at the time. Again, we have not spoken to him directly. We've tried to speak to him in the aftermath of these
Calls
charges.
have gone unreturned.
Correct, but the whispers we heard from May's camp were, oh, this is the deep state. It's a setup. And so you got to think, if he's saying that to his colleagues, they've known him all these years.
And the other thing is that it's not like this was some, political calculation on a lot of these members' parts. I mean, I've spoken with them. A lot of them just could not understand how this could be true because, as you say, they've known RJ for years. They know his wife. They know his children. I mean, RJ is the representative for House District 88. That's where I live. I got to know him. I'm his
Yeah, he's
constituent.
been in this studio.
Right. And
we've had him on this show.
It was shocking to me, and it was shocking to them. Yeah. So I think we talk about this from the surgical, analytical, political operative mindset of how could they have handled the communications better. But at the end of the day, they were also, I think, just unwilling to believe it as people because this was so counter to the RJ they knew. And this is something that was even kind of referenced in the court filings where they said even RJ's wife, who shared a bedroom with him, had no indication that this was going on.
Completely unaware. And Andy said it in the opening to this show, two RJ Mays. There was the one that we all knew, that we thought we knew, and now there's this monster that apparently he was the whole time. But Dylan, obviously a lot of confusion in the initial response from the Freedom Caucus, but let me tell you, there was absolutely no confusion in the statement that was issued once these indictments were issued. In fact, actually, this statement was issued before the indictments were unsealed. This statement was issued in the aftermath of R.J. May's arrest, and I just want to read it real quick. The South Carolina Freedom Caucus stands firmly for the rule of law and the protection of children. Representative R.J. May has been expelled from our caucus. He has not been involved in the operations of the caucus since August of 2024, which is when we reported on the raid. We call for his immediate resignation from the House. Although formal charges have not been made public yet, again, this was at the time before the indictments, all indications are that these indictments will be for child sex abuse materials. These crimes are heinous, and we expect that they will be fully investigated. We pray justice is served, as the statement from the Freedom Caucus specifically attributed to its chairman, Jordan Pace. Strong words.
Strong words, and I think that is because by this time, it was not just us saying these things. There had been documents that had been filed in federal court by the federal government because they wanted to keep RJ's evidence, basically the evidentiary materials that they collected from his house on the day of that search warrant. But due to the judicial process, they have to justify why they're keeping this evidence past a certain time period. So at that time, they're not going out and sticking their necks out there and just relying on, one news outlet's reports. Right. But they could, with some level of certainty say this is what is happening. And they certainly took a strong stance there.
Here's the other thing I just want to bring up, and it's kind of occurring to me as we're talking. Obviously, we hear this term child pornography, child sex abuse material. Certainly, the two are used interchangeably. The federal statute still references child pornography, so that's what the federal prosecutors have to reference in their filings. But it's a term that until you see the details of specific allegations and specific charges, you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. All of it is abhorrent. All of it is reprehensible. All of it is
no kid can consent to be doing anything of that nature.
Absolutely. All of it is awful. But certainly when you're dealing with, a picture, a still image, like, for example, we covered the Rose Petal murder, and there were child sex abuse material components to that story that involved pictures and some abuse. In this case, we are dealing with abuse allegations is so bad we can't even really talk about it on this show.
It's the most heinous stuff that one could imagine.
And so I guess my question would be, not that there's any degree of this that's good, but this was so far over the line of what anyone was expecting to read. I mean, this stuff was just, and we'd heard it was going to be bad. We were kind of bracing for what we were going to see in this filing and what we were going to hear, what Andy was going to hear in that courtroom. But this was so far over and beyond anything I think anyone suspected. I mean, you agree?
Yeah, and going back to the political response, I think front running this by booting him before that even became public was wise on their part, not waiting to do that after all of this heinous stuff became public. I mean, they released that statement about 12 hours before if anybody would like to go to our website, we have the court filings up there. They can read them themselves and see what we're talking about. But it's horrific, beyond horrific.
Yeah. I mean, they're really, as a father reading that, just, I don't know what to say.
Under the jail.
Yeah. I tried to film a video outside the courtroom after we had done our reporting. I tried to film a video encapsulating what I thought as a dad. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. It was too brutal. Continuing, though, with the discussion of the political fallout, obviously there are certain members in the South Carolina House of Representatives who have been adversarial, let's put it politely or put it charitably, to the Freedom Caucus, who have really jumped on these revelations and have sought to use it as a brush with which to paint the entire Freedom Caucus. In fact, we've heard language from some of these Republican lawmakers about the Freedom Caucus harboring a pedophile. I don't know if that's the kind of thing that is going to hold water in the long term, but I did want to read real quickly a statement that we received. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read a section of it here from the South Carolina Republican Caucus, which is the group that has been sparring with the Freedom Caucus for control.
And for folks who are new to this dynamic, you might see Republicans, Freedom Caucus, both of these guys are on the right. But the Republicans in this state really don't like the Freedom Caucus because they will go in there and primary Republican representatives by running farther to the right of them, by saying that these Republican representatives aren't conservative enough. And there's a lot of Republican representatives who live in districts that will realistically only ever go to a Republican representative. So the only person who can knock them off is another Republican. So by running this group, and RJ was a House representative, but professionally he was a political operative who would run candidates, he was a real threat to these guys' control of the state house and to their livelihoods. So his downfall is a real boon for them. But continue.
Yeah, and actually that point is important because this arrest took place mere months after RJ May's greatest triumph.
Correct. RJ May engineered a clean sweep of getting his guys back into the state house, and he also got a number of new candidates into the state house, and that was facing headwinds of being significantly outspent by the mainstream GOP caucus in the last primary cycle.
Millions of dollars from this Republican establishment were pumped in against RJ May.
And I actually have the results of some of these millions of dollars right here. These are attack advertisements which were left in my mailbox as a resident of the district.
Yeah.
That
I think they're going to have some more effective mail pieces.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be called a caveman, but he's much worse than that if these allegations are true.
Indeed. Well, I wanted to read this statement because this was from the majority leader, the outgoing majority leader of the South Carolina House Republican Caucus. And he said, and I quote, "Mr. May is not a member of the Republican Caucus, deciding to create and lead the Fringe Freedom Caucus shortly after being elected to the House. During his tenure, he has continually proven he has no true desire to help his constituents or the people of South Carolina. His only desire is to serve his own interests. Mr. May has proven himself unfit to serve the citizens of District 88. This has become even more clear in the most disturbing of ways." Now, Hyatt then goes on to say that he has filed a complaint with the House Ethics Committee in which he is seeking investigatory authority to look into, quote, May's business dealings with other members of the South Carolina House of Representatives. And he is also beginning the process of expelling May from the South Carolina House. So, Dylan, a lot of news here in this official statement from the Republican majority leader. What do you make of what you read here? It sounds like they're going to go on a little bit of a witch hunt here.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to make hay while the sun shines. This is a guy who's perennially been a thorn in their side. He's been probably their most effective enemy, a far more effective enemy than the Democrats have posed to the Republican establishment in this state. Um, and it's important to note that while RJ was a skilled political operative, um, he was able to do this because the winds are at his back, and the voters, I think, are behind the ideas that the Freedom Caucus pushes. And so, in politics, if the winds are at your back, it really helps you. And if they're in your face, you almost can't win. Like if Donald Trump had died of a stroke or some other natural cause of death, we would most likely right now be looking at another Republican in office because Joe Biden's administration and the economic environment leading up to that election favored Republicans heavily. In the same way, there's a lot of these districts where uh, the representation that is currently there, these guys who have been in there for a long time, they are vulnerable because fundamentally vulnerable because they sit to the left of where the primary voters are. The primary voters being a group that are usually more partisan than the general electorate in the district. So with RJ May on or off the table, these are going to be winnable races for whoever's going to step in and try to fill the RJ May sized void for the folks who want to run to the right of the mainstream GOP. So I would expect these political operatives, these guys who are going to be facing off against the next wave, to try to muddy the waters as much as possible for whoever's going to try to take that mantle. The current leadership of the Freedom Caucus, as well as the next round of political operatives who steps up to run these races.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where this goes from here in terms of the political fallout, because obviously we first reported on RJ May's troubles last August. It took a little while, but eventually the news of what he was staring down, again, not the horrific details of it, not the true extent of the depravity that was,
It was still shocking to see the full extent in these documents.
but we had a sense of kind of where it was going, and it was beginning to be widely reported. Yet, despite that, and despite their communication stumbles in initially dealing with this development, the Freedom Caucus drove the narrative at the State House during this past legislative session. While they may not have gotten what they wanted accomplished, they dictated the debate. They threw a lot of shade on those status quo Republicans now making hay while the sun shines, as you said. And so I wanted to ask you this. If they were able to sort of recapture the narrative after the initial drama with RJ May, where do you see the political debate flowing from this? Because now we're dealing obviously with an entirely different environment, an entirely different political calculus moving forward. Can the Freedom Caucus recover from something like this? And how do you see it impacting their ability to continue driving the narrative at the State House?
Well, that's kind of the ultimate question, and I think what we were working towards, and that's why I was referencing the winds being at their back. I think that those fundamental factors, which are what allowed RJ to do what he did, have not gone away. Obviously, if you're operative for the mainstream GOP, you're going to try to use this to generate as much negative publicity for those guys as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, none of the folks who voted for the candidates who RJ was working with, or even for RJ himself, would have voted for the disgusting behavior that he's being accused of. But they still would vote for somebody that is the kind of candidate that he was working with. So, fundamentals go a lot farther in many things, in politics, in business. They go a lot farther than the individual people who are actually executing them. I think the best Democrat candidate could not have won the presidency this cycle, and I think that no matter who's running the show, there's going to be a lane, just given the fundamental dynamics of the state of South Carolina right now, there's going to continue to be a lane for these types of candidates to run in. Now, will they run in, as members of the Freedom Caucus? I don't know. Obviously, the group has held together, and I think that they look like they're going to survive this, but there might be a more effective vehicle for people of that ideological bent in the future.
Doge SC movement, perhaps.
Doge SC, Rom Reddy's spinning that up right now, and it seems to be involving a lot of the same people, both, publicly and behind the scenes. But there's other avenues. But do I think that running to the right of the mainstream GOP, the very purple mainstream GOP in this state, it's just too good of an opportunity for, aspiring politicians or people who want to, who are politicians who want to climb the ladder a little bit. it's too good of an opportunity for folks to not continue to try to do that.
Certainly. So we've broken this story down on the criminal side, the legal side. We've assessed the political fallout. But before we go, I wanted to address the morality of this story. Whatever you think of R.J. May, whatever you think of the Republican Party, whatever you think of the Freedom Caucus, and whatever you believe about the guilt or innocence of R.J. May, what we have seen in these filings defies the ability to express, to comprehend. It is so awful. It is so abhorrent. And it involves children. Children subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The fact that there are individuals who derive gratification from this is disgusting. And Dylan said it best. Don't put them in jail, put them under the jail. In fact, a few years ago on FITSNews, I wrote a column about those who perpetrate these kind of crimes, arguing that we should bring back the old slow-hanging method of execution. Forget these firing squads, forget lethal injection, forget the electric chair. String these people up who engage in this kind of conduct. These are children being abused in ways that we can't even imagine. So as we follow this story, as we break down the criminal filings, as we assess the pleas, as we await verdicts, and as we look to the elections that will follow, keep those victims in mind. Please keep those victims in mind. And if you're a parent, hug your kid extra close tonight. Keep an eye out for what they're doing on their phones. Because, folks, this is an environment that is just toxic. And it is our job as parents, as members of the press, and as leaders, elected leaders. And perhaps that's maybe the greatest betrayal by R.J. May, if in fact he is found guilty or pleads guilty to these crimes, is that as a leader, your job is to protect the least of those among us, the most vulnerable of those among us, not to savagely and sickly exploit them for your own benefit. But as we move forward from this story, keep those victims in mind, please, above all else, because that is the one constant of this story, no matter what side you fall down on, no matter what your political allegiance, ideological affiliation, that should be your goal, true justice for these victims. Now, if you follow FITSNews again, your support, your subscriptions, they empower everything we do. We have been driving this story from the very beginning, breaking the original arrest, breaking the original search last year, and closely monitoring every phase of this story as it unfolds. If you want to continue to support that sort of hard-hitting investigative journalism and this sort of analysis, please consider subscribing to FITSNews today because, again, these lights, the cameras, and what we bring to you here on this show is all thanks to your support. So I would encourage you, again, if you value this kind of independent reporting that drives these stories and that holds folks accountable, please consider subscribing to FITSNews. I want to thank our Andy Fancher. I want to thank our Dylan Nolan. I want to thank everyone who's followed these, again, horrific stories. Thank you for your support as we continue to do our best to uncover the truth and make sense of all of it as this case moves forward. We appreciate you joining us again for a very special, very sad, very somber edition of Your Week in Review.